Alrighty guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the second episode, supercharging this 1971 Cutlass. Hey guys, before this video starts up, I just wanted to get on here and apologize for the last video on the Cutlass. I don't know what happened with YouTube. I had a 20+ minute video that was gonna come out on this car, and for some reason YouTube deleted most of it and it only kept 6 minutes, which is really weird. So I actually lost all of that footage. If you do want to watch a little bit of it, I have a YouTube short, or I also have a TikTok up on this car. It kind of summarizes it down a little bit, but just once again, I want to apologize for that. That really sucks because there was a ton of good information there, but hopefully this will make up for it and you guys will enjoy this episode on the Cutlass. So goal for today is to pretty much finish up all of the major fabrication that we have to do with getting the radiator in and the intercooler and all of our piping and everything figured out. And hopefully everything mocked up in here. That way we can get it all final welded, pull it out, and then paint it all. So where we left off last time was we got the header in, got the motor set back in, did the oil return line, and then the oil pressure line as well. And so now it's time to install our supercharger again. So we actually got the right fitting this time. It had this fitting on it, which had the hose on top, but since I am swapping to AN just because they're better, this is what we're going to be running with. So I'm going to get this installed, and then we are going to install the supercharger one more time. But before we install the supercharger, I'm actually going to try and tuck most of this wiring away. We're moving the battery to the rear because we don't have room for it. So I'm going to get all of these wires kind of gone out of here-ish. That way I can cut this battery box out because it is completely rusted and gone, and I don't want to be grinding when the supercharger is going to be right here. So we're going to get that cut out, and then we are going to get the supercharger mocked up again. Okay, so all of the wiring I got out of the way. I got the battery cables pulled out, and they are underneath the car right now. And then I also cut out the battery tray because it was completely rotted, and got the power steering pump off. So now that we have all of this room, we can kind of figure out and plan where all of our piping is going to go. So now I think it's time we start to get our radiator unboxed to make sure it fits and everything looks good there. And then after that, we are going to work on the intercooler. So check that out. That is our gorgeous Griffin radiator, and it has 2 huge fans on the back. This should be plenty of cooling for this Cutlass. These radiators are absolutely amazing company. So let's get this thing installed. Okay, so good news, the radiator does clear, but just barely. I probably have like that much room above the radiator cap from where the hood is. So it's okay because we actually can move the radiator down a little bit. So these are the original bushings that go around the radiator to kind of hold it into place. Now the stock radiator on these, I actually have a brand new one right here. Look how much thinner that is than that. Like that is pretty thick. And we wanted a big radiator because this thing is going to be producing a lot of heat, and we want to be able to keep it cool. So also on the bottom, it has these same rubber bushings, and that is pushing it up a little bit. So if I can get down there and open them up a little bit, it'll drop my radiator down, and then I'll open these up a little bit more, and it'll kind of push it down and hold it there. So luckily it fits, and then it also clears all of my pulleys just barely. I need to throw on my head unit to make sure all of that clears. And then that will pretty much decide where this radiator is going to be. So hopefully it's right here, but let's get that head unit mocked up and then we'll see. Okay, so we got the Vortex supercharger all bolted up and everything looks good there. Got the radiator thrown back in. Also, I notched those lower radiator mounts just so I could get the radiator to sit a little bit lower. And you could see there is plenty of room for that supercharger pulley. Now that is the farthest thing out from the motor. That's really the only issue that we have to deal with, or I guess the only thing that we have to worry about because everything else is up tight close to the motor. Okay, so now that the radiator is where I want it, I'm gonna have to modify this top piece right here to make it hold my radiator in place. So you can see here, this is the stock radiator bracket, and that is about lined up with the holes. You see we're about 1 inch off, but then look how far out it pushes this. Now that puts it extremely close to my supercharger pulley. So that's why I'm gonna push it up a little bit more this way. That way it gives us a little bit more room. I have to modify this piece. I'm gonna chop this so that I can get it to suck up a little bit tighter, and I'm gonna have to build a little angle piece right here That way it will work. Okay, so got that piece modified and kind of tacked in place, and you can see it holds my radiator pretty well. So there's really no play. I'm gonna weld these up, that way these won't bend, and it will continue to hold my radiator as we go over bumps and it drives down the road. So now that I got that pretty much mocked up where I want it, I'm gonna pull it off and we're gonna final weld it right here on the floor and then reinstall it one more time, make sure it fits, make sure everything looks good and is where we want it to be. And you can see we have great clearance all the way back here, which is gonna be awesome. And then that will pretty much finish up this part on the radiator. So let's pull this radiator mount off and let's get it final welded. Okay, so got that installed and honestly, it worked extremely well. So holds it pretty good, doesn't move really at all. Now what I'm gonna do is the intercooler is next. This is gonna sit in front of the radiator. So I decided I'm going to pull apart this front end. I'm gonna pull off the bumper, pull off the grill, probably pull the headlights. That way I can get the intercooler mocked up with the radiator sitting here, because I want them to be pretty close together so that the air will go straight through them instead of maybe passing around one or passing around the other. So that's what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna tear apart the whole entire front of this car. Okay, so got the front bumper off. When I pulled the front bumper off, the whole grill came with it, which I wondered why everything seemed a little loose, but whoever put this together didn't put any of the bolts in it. So all this just fell apart. These bumper bars, which go right here and then to the frame, no bolts in it. They literally just fell right out. I'm glad I tore this all apart because I had no idea. I wondered why it was a little loose, but I didn't know if I wanted to get into it, but I'm glad I did because now I'm gonna replace all the bolts and make sure everything's tight and the front end of this doesn't fall off while he's driving down the road. But you can see why I pulled that off, just because now I can see all of this room and see what I have to modify to fit my intercooler right there. But I'm gonna have to modify a couple things in here. I'm probably gonna have to move my horns. I'm gonna pull those out and then see if I can get my intercooler in here behind these braces. So I'm gonna tear off those horns and then kind of mock that intercooler up in there just to see if we have enough room or if I have to modify anything else. Okay, so luckily the intercooler fits. I'm gonna lift it up a little bit. That way it doesn't sit on this because I'm worried about the clearance from the bottom of the bumper. So it'll sit up a little bit higher, probably about right here. The nice thing is this has 4 mounting spots, one here, one on that side, and then bottom and bottom. So I have flat bar that I'm going to make some tabs out of. That way I can drill a hole through it and bolt it up, and then I'm gonna run a bar all the way across. I'm probably gonna bolt it in because in order to get this in, that bar I think would be in the way and it wouldn't let me slide this in. Now I'm not too worried about that because I could just pull the radiator and install it like that. But I think if I bolt it in, it will make it a little bit easier. I can just unbolt that bracket and then just bolt it back up again. That way I won't run into any issues installing this. So now that I know that everything fits, I am gonna have to move my horns because they are in the way. So I'll figure out where I wanna put those. But that is pretty much it. I'm going to start the fabrication on the tabs and the brackets to hold the intercooler in place. And then you can see we've got perfect shots straight through this on both sides that we're gonna run our tubing out of. I'm just gonna cut some holes in here. That way we can run the tubing through, and I mean, that'll be easy. Lots of work to do. Let's get started on the intercooler fabrication. Okay, so that lower brace is pretty much mocked up. So that's gonna sit underneath the bottom of the intercooler. Now I still have to, I'm gonna weld these, but I want it to be right in the right spot. So I'm gonna tighten everything down, tack these into place, and then I'm gonna see exactly where the mounting points are on the intercooler so that I can build tabs off of this, and then I'll run bolts through those. So once I do that and get the bottom of the intercooler bolted up to this, then we'll be able to move to our top mount and get that fabricated, and then that will pretty much be it for the intercooler mounts. So let's get started. Okay, so all of the brackets are pretty much mocked up. So now I'm going to tear everything apart and I'm gonna final weld everything and then reinstall one more time, make sure everything fits good. Okay, all of the brackets for the intercooler are made. Everything is welded, everything is tight. It looks really good. There is a perfect gap between my radiator and intercooler, so I'm happy with all of that. Now it's time to move to the tubing because that's pretty much where we're at. We got the radiator where we want it to be. Now the intercooler is set where we want it to be. So now it's time to start working on our intercooler piping. But in order to start that, my EFI unit is on its way. And then we also ordered the hat for it. So I'll be able to get that on there to see where the piping needs to go. But first we need to clock this supercharger 180 degrees so that it's pointing this way. And then we're going to probably notch this and then bring our tube around here and put it in through there. So I'm gonna work on getting the supercharger clocked 180 degrees first, and then we're gonna be able to start making all of our piping. Okay, so in order to clock this supercharger, I actually have to pull off all of my brackets again. So I pretty much have to completely disassemble all of this, pull the supercharger off, and then you can see these bolts right here hold in this plate, and that holds in the other half of the supercharger to this half. So I'm gonna get it pulled off, and then we're gonna loosen these and clock it 180 degrees. Okay, so kind of got this cut so my supercharger will fit, but now the problem is I'm hitting here. Okay, so you can see the supercharger is supposed to be clocked like this, and there's a little bit of room, but once I start to clock it this other way, it hits. So I am going to have to clearance that bracket just a little bit so that I can fit the supercharger facing the other way. Okay, so supercharger is clocked about maybe where I want it. I might want to go a little bit lower because I know my intake tubing is going to have to come over this way because we're going to put our intake filter right here. So I may want to drop this down a little bit, but what I want to check now is you could see this is the clearancing that I had to do. So I had to take a decent amount out of the bracket just so it would fit, but now it doesn't touch. And as you can see, as I lift it up, it actually clears more. So now that that is pretty much there, the next thing I need to do is I need to see how much room I have with the new wheels, because if I have enough room, I'm actually going to drop this down and cut out a little bit more. So you can see these are the wheels that are on it right now. I think they are 20s. Alrighty, so check these out. These are the wheels that the customer decided to go with, and they are gorgeous. I absolutely love them. Some nice Forgiatos. So I'm gonna throw this on the car over there, and then we're gonna turn it lock to lock and see how much clearance we have. Okay, so the wheel is on, and you can see when we turn it the other way, it rubs all along that right there. So I'm gonna have to cut that and move it back a little bit. It also gets extremely close to this point right here, so we may have to bend that up a little. Front-wise, it's good here. It looks good. It has a lot of clearance up here. So I know he's got the front end of this lifted up a little bit, I think like 2 inches, which helps us out a lot because you can see the tires right there. We have a good amount of room. I mean, I could fit almost my whole hand until I touch the tire, but we also need to account for all the bumps and the movement. So I think about right there is where I want it. If I tilt it up a little bit like this, and then we'll just view our piping. So I'll have to cut out all of this, relocate this wiring. But that's pretty much how we're gonna have it, is like that, which is gonna look kind of cool because this will come like this down here, and then our intake piping will come up and over. So we're gonna have clearance for everything, which is really good. But I just have to do more cutting to make everything fit. Okay, so decided to do a little bit of change of plans. I pulled these out because they just do not fit with these wheels. There's going to be too much fabrication that had to go on, and they're plastic, so it would be really hard to repair them and make them work. So we actually just decided to pull them off, and I'm actually going to build some wheel wells out of metal that'll just kind of like cover the top, but most of the bottom will be left open, and that will pretty much give us all of our room to be able to do all of our piping and everything too, which is going to be really nice. But I really like it like that. I think it looks good. So another big change that we decided to do is this wiring is super, super old. It's really brittle. It has like pieces that have been cut and respliced and like this kind of stuff going on. Just like a lot of stuff has been done to this, and I haven't even looked under the dash. So we decided that we are going to do a American Auto wire wiring harness on it. Now this is for the 72 Chevelle, but it'll work on this Cutlass, and we'll just have to order another one for the Chevelle. So it'll be a little bit more work for me, but I'm okay with that because just getting rid of this old wiring and doing new wiring and not having the car burned to the ground like that would be absolutely amazing. So I'm super glad we're gonna do that, but this just turned into a little bit bigger project than I thought it would be, but that's okay. But we're gonna keep moving along on this project. Got a lot of work to do, so I'm going to get all this old wiring out of my way. I'm gonna cut it at the firewall. That way I can just get it out of there. We're also deleting the old AC unit. We may eventually do vintage air on this, but that will probably be at the end of this year. So I'm just gonna build a plate for that. But when we pull the motor out to do the final paint on everything, then we'll deal with that. So I'm gonna work on getting the wiring out right now. And then after that, I think we're gonna move to just cutting these holes where the intercooler piping is going to pass through. Okay, so I pulled the radiator, and you can see this is where we are going to do our hole right there. So I'm gonna come from this back side, cut out the holes on both sides, and then make them look even. So I didn't realize how long this video is going to be, so I'm actually gonna split this one up into 2 parts. But I got a ton finished up in this first part. I mean, we got the radiator mounted, we got the intercooler mounted, all the brackets fabricated, the supercharger clocked, and pretty much ready for the piping. So that's exactly what we're gonna do in the next video, is fabricate all of the intercooler piping and intake piping. And then we're also going to get the gas tank removed and all of the fuel lines removed because we're replacing them. And I'm super stoked to show you how all of the piping came out. So be sure to stay tuned for next week when I release the next episode on this 1971 Cutlass.